Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Gifford here, and today I'm going to do a brief lesson on fractions review with you. And after this lesson, you should be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions. So let's get to our first example, adding fractions. And so my first question to you is, what do we have to have, or what do we need in order to add fractions? And the answer to that is, we need a common denominator. So with my first example that I have for you, we're going to find the sum of 3/10 and 8/12. So again, like I said, we need to have a common denominator. So you need to ask yourself, what number can both 10 and 12 go into? And I know a lot of you like to just take the two denominators and multiply them together. That's fine. But I also know that 60 is a multiple of both 10 and 12. So I'm going to change each of my fractions so that they have a common denominator of 60. Now, how did I get there? I know that 10 times 6 makes 60. And so I also, rules of fractions say, whatever we do to the top, we have to do to the bottom. So I also had to do 3 times 6 to make 18. And then I also know that 12 times 5 makes 60. So not only do I do the 12 times 5, but I also have to do 8 times 5 to make 40. So then I have 18 60ths plus 40 60ths. Once you have that common denominator, when we're adding, we're going to keep that same denominator. So as we can see here, whoops, I'm going to move that back, sorry. As we can see here, 60 is my denominator. I kept that 60, and once you have that common denominator, all we have to do is add our numerators. So 18 plus 40 gives us 58. And then the last thing that we need to do is look to see if we can simplify it. And I see that both of my numbers are even, so I know that 58 is divisible by 2 and 60 is divisible by 2, and I get 29 30ths. So again, when we add fractions, we have to have that common denominator. If we had multiplied 10 by 120, if you did it correctly, you would have ended up getting 29 30ths also once it's simplified. Okay, the next example, let's take a look at subtracting fractions. What do we need in order to subtract fractions? We need a common denominator, just like addition. So let's take a look at our first example here. We need to find the difference with 13 and 6/7 minus 7 and 15/17. Again, we need a common denominator. I already have that. So the first thing that I'm going to suggest we do is actually change each of our mixed numbers into improper fractions. And in order for us to be able to do that, we're going to do the big number times the denominator. Okay, so 3 times 17, that gives us our 221. And then we're going to add the numerator. So we're going to take 221 plus 6 to make 227. And that 227 becomes our new numerator. And then I'm going to do the same thing, excuse me, I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to do 7 times 17. That gives me 119. And then I'm going to do 119 plus the 15, and that gives me 134. 134 is my new numerator. And once I have my denominators or my fractions set up, as long as my denominator is the same, I'm going to keep the denominator, and just like addition, I'm going to subtract my numerators. So I do 227 minus 134, and that gives me 93 over 17. Now, as we look at this fraction, we see that it's an improper fraction. So now I need to ask myself, how many times does 17 come out of 93? And that answer is 5. So 5 is going to become my whole number of the mixed number. 5 times 17 gives me 85. So then what I have to do is 93 minus 85. Again, the 93 comes from our numerator. 85 gives us the total of 5 groupings, and that gives us the remainder of 8. And so 8 becomes the new numerator. So our answer when we subtract these two fractions is 5 and 8/17. Now let's move on to example 3, which is multiplying fractions. So what do we need in order to multiply fractions? Well, I can tell you what we don't need is a common denominator, which is completely different from adding and subtracting fractions. So let's take a look at my first example that I have for you. We're going to find the product of 21 23rds and 40 62nds. Again, we do not need this common denominator. And the easiest thing, the thing that I like about multiplying fractions is we are just going to multiply straight across. So we're going to multiply the numerators. 21 times 40 gives us 840, and 23 times 62 gives us 1,426. And as with anything else, we want to simplify this and ask ourselves, is there anything that we can divide both numbers by? And I know that 840 and 1426 are both even numbers, so I'm going to divide them each by 2. And when we do that, we get 420 over 713. And there isn't any other way to simplify these two, so 420 over 713 is our final answer. All right, so last example, let's move on to dividing fractions. And what do we need in order to divide fractions? Just like I said with multiplication, you don't need a common denominator. You can make one, but you're giving yourself extra work to do. So here's our last example. We're going to find the quotient between 62 77ths divided by 99 100ths. So the first thing we're going to do is write our problem down. Second thing is, we did this earlier this school year. We are going to keep the first fraction, 62 over 77. Oops, that should not be equals there. That should actually be times. So we're going to change, sorry about that, we are going to change this equal sign to multiplication. Okay, so we're going to change division to multiplication. And then we're going to flip this second fraction. And what do we call that when we flip that second fraction? Yes, that's right. We call it the reciprocal. Okay, so we're going to multiply by the reciprocal of that second fraction. Flip that over. And now the example right before this, we actually talked about multiplying two fractions. Well, what are we going to do? We are going to multiply straight across. We're going to do 62 times 100, and we are going to do 77 times 99. I get 6,200 over 7,623, and I cannot simplify that any further, so this is our final answer. All right, folks, so there's your 4 examples, and now what I want you to do is take a few minutes to write your summary and talk about today I learned, and I want you to come write one sentence for each of those 4 examples. What did you learn about, or what did we talk about with adding fractions? What did we talk about subtracting fractions? What did we talk about with multiplication, and what did we talk about division? And then I want you to write one question that you have about the information that you learned today. Best of luck to you all.